Hello, everybody. Really delighted to welcome Sean Blackwell, who I know so many of you will recognise and know the work of, to the Emerging Proud campaign. Hi, Sean. I know I described you as the king of Emerging Proud because you kind of came out of the spiritual closet like 10 years ago on YouTube. And
the dinosaur.
Yeah. I think king is probably better.
Okay.
So you're most famous for your YouTube channel and your book, Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? YouTube channel, Bipolar Awakenings. And I know so many people have kind of really said how just so relieved they were to find your work and to kind of really have some validation about what they were going through and find a framework within what to understand their experiences rather than the kind of bipolar disorder label that they've been given. So we're so grateful for all of your work and really excited to have you here with us and to share for those of you who don't know your story, a bit of your story and the work that's led you to do now. So yes, welcome.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. And I think your Emerging Proud initiative is terrific. I mean, it's something that has to happen. And like we were talking about a little bit earlier, when I first came out in 2007, I was kind of expecting other people to sort of jump in, and a few people came and went. But honestly, I've been surprised that there hasn't been more of an initiative happening online.
Well,
I didn't expect to. Yeah.
It takes a lot of bravery, doesn't it? And I think, you were one of the first really to put yourself out there. So I think, with the Emerging Proud campaign, more and more people are getting braver and speaking out about their stories, but it's easier the more of us that do. So I think you've kind of led the way, really. Just wonder if you would give people a bit of background, first of all, Sean, about what happened to you and what kind of led to you realizing that your experiences were a spiritual awakening.
Okay. And it's in my very first video, 2007. I was at a self-help seminar called the Landmark Forum. And to make a long story short, that Landmark Forum was very kind of psychologically stressful, but maybe more energetically stressful would be a good way to put it. Right. Or energetically just inspiring, because I was going home at night, quivering from what we were learning and what I was taking in and the connections I was having with people. We had 150 people in kind of a tight room. And to make a long story really short, I was starting to get kind of excited, but then they had a 5-minute meditation, just focus on your fear. And I didn't think I had any fear, but I focused, and then they said, imagine somebody's trying to kill you or kidnap you, and that didn't work for me. But all of a sudden, a memory of a scuba diving accident I had had just 2 months earlier, where I lost my weight belt about 30 meters below and went shooting into the surface, that came up. And then I felt this punch in my chest, and I started to cry, and I really started to feel this fear that I had completely blocked off, because if you feel fear in a scuba diving accident, you die,
Yeah.
But all covered. And after that, all my senses got sharpened, and I just sort of stepped into that other reality, By the way, my videos are also famous for having a lot of airplanes flying off in the background. People know those are my airplanes.
Your fleet.
My fleet, yeah. I live near the airport. So, all my senses got sharpened. And as people with bipolar disorder, one thing leads to another. And a few days later, I just came to the conclusion that I died. And I had died in that scuba diving accident. And that I was in some sort of a purgatory between heaven and hell, or nirvana. And I needed to somehow get to the other dimension. And I started to go into these kind of my own rituals. This all happened in a hotel. So I went into a ballroom by myself, and I had to go to the bathroom, and I just confronted my fears of peeing in a ballroom in a hotel, and I peed all over the floor. And then I confronted my fear of urine, and I laid down in it. And then they came and wanted me to put my clothes on because I'd taken my shirt off, and I just took off everything except my underwear. And then they took me to the hospital. And I still thought I was going to nirvana. I thought, this is the craziest way to go to heaven I've ever imagined. And they took me and hospitalized me and handcuffed me. And I was like, this is really incredible that's happening. And once I was there, I started to realize that the doctors weren't being particularly nice to me. And the security staff was actually some of them were kind of mean. And I thought, well, God's not going to do that to me. I passed all the tests and they're still being mean. And so after some sleep and a forced injection, I started to sort of come back, and I just realized I didn't know what was going on, but I needed to get out of that hospital, And so I just started telling them what they wanted to hear. And I was very blessed. I was able to get out of there in 4 days. And I rarely meet anybody online who's in and out of the hospital in 4 days. It's usually a 2-week minimum.
Especially after that extreme an experience. Yeah. So you kind of had enough cognition about you within that experience to know what you shouldn't say within the first few days to enable you to get out.
Yeah.
So you grounded quite quickly.
Yeah, I guess you'd say I grounded quite quickly. I mean, 2 months later, I still thought I made my car disappear one day. I just thought I wanted a new car, and then I couldn't find it in a parking lot. And I thought, oh, I think I just made the car disappear. And that was 2 months later. So there were moments,
Right.
But I always saw it as a spiritual experience. I just didn't know what was going on. Or I told my brother-in-law, I said, the hardest thing to get adjusted to was I didn't know if this was real or if I was dreaming.
Right.
And he said to me, well, when did you figure it out? And I said, I never did. I just got used to it. And to a certain extent, that's still the way I see the world. I don't think I would have been able to start making these videos unless I believed in some sort of parallel universes where based on the choices we make, we can move into a dimension where healing happens and where people aren't stuck in these situations.
Yeah.
So I believe the universe is, flexible, and a flexible universe to me is kind of like a dreamlike state.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back, Sean, to when you were describing kind of how it all started. You mentioned energy being really significant, and I know you talk about in your videos the cause of bipolar disorder being Kundalini energy and stuck energy. Would you just describe a bit about that and your kind of what you've come to understand as the cause and how it's all related?
Okay. Well, I don't think I don't know if we're ever going to be able to scientifically prove how our energy system works, although MRIs seem to touch on it a little bit. But, the Kundalini system is I call it the Kundalini system. Some people might call it a chakra system. And it's like a bioenergetic field that goes through the whole body. And what's a little bit complicated is the heart of this energy is sort of kept in the coccyx part, the tailbone. Is that how you pronounce it, coccyx? And so when people have what they call a classic Kundalini awakening, as described in the books of Hindu literature and things like that, they talk about this surge of energy coming up from the coccyx, up the spine, and comes out through the top of the head, brings all these wonderful things with it, and it's just this fantastic experience. It sort of makes you enlightened in a way. But for most of us, we're having these kind of Kundalini experiences, and we're going through hell because we don't have a cultural context for it. We don't know what it is. We don't know how to manage it. And this system seems to be trying to work through blockages that are in that bioenergetic system. It's like the Kundalini intelligence is trying to work through these blockages. And we just don't have a cultural context to let that happen. I guess that would be, and those blockages are caused by some sorts of trauma in the broadest sense of the word trauma. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to ask you was about the blockages related to repressed emotional trauma, would you say?
Yeah. Trauma in the sense, a lot of times people think of trauma as just something bad that happens to you. But that's not really it. What trauma is the blocked feelings or denied feelings that happen when you have an extraordinarily difficult event happen to you. Okay. So for example, in my scuba diving accident, even though it happened just 2 months before the Landmark Forum, it traumatized me because I didn't have a second to think about my fear or to think about my emotions. I was solely focused on getting to the surface without my lungs exploding or without having a brain aneurysm. So I needed to relax. Okay? And so that's a great example of emotions that were totally repressed. And even my friends afterwards were like, they were looking at me like, I'm acting like everything's okay. I went scuba diving the next day. And they're looking at me like, something's off with Sean, because you just don't come back like that after a near-death experience underwater, you know.
So I'm just thinking about what you said about our culture doesn't understand the energy, but also it teaches us to repress those kind of fears and emotional traumas, doesn't it? Where, you know, anger or heightened expressed emotion isn't acceptable really within our culture. So there's no wonder people pop when we're so kind of used to, you know, socially having to repress everything all the time.
And I was talking to a girl yesterday, and that type of trauma can be just emotional repression, like you said. And in her case, you know, this one particular girl, you know, her father never did anything particularly abusive to her, but she had to deal with his rage and his anger and his dominance over the family day after day after day for years and years and years. And that can build up, just a subtle thing building up over time, you know. So that's a form of trauma, emotional repression.
Absolutely. Really, really fascinating. It makes so much sense, doesn't it? So after you said you were still kind of experiencing quite heightened states a couple of months after you were out of hospital. What happened after that, Sean? How did you come across the work of the transpersonal psychotherapist whose work you followed, you know, Graf and everybody that you base your work on now? How did that happen? Was it synchronicity?
I guess, you know, an ex-girlfriend recommended that I go to a Rolfing masseuse. Rolfing is where they do this very deep massage of the fascia tissue. It's the connective tissue in your bones and things. And I thought, I want to keep working on my process. So I went to her and I told her everything that happened. And she used to date the gardener of Terence McKenna. Okay. So she was really connected to this kind of sort of, I don't know, new age therapy type people. And she got me on to Stan Grof, Dr. Stanislav Grof, and his books. And then I picked up The Stormy Search for the Self. And, you know, my parents had said to me and my brother, they'd said, you know, why don't you see somebody about this? Why don't you see a psychologist? I said, why would I see somebody who has absolutely no idea what I went through? I mean, they don't have any idea. I had a spiritual experience. It wasn't a psychological problem. It was like the best thing that ever happened to me. And then when I picked up Grof's book, The Stormy Search for the Self, and I read about spiritual emergency, I was like, well, this is it. Everything that was in that book was what happened to me. And so this was when I was like 31, and I started to get into Grof's work quite a bit. You know, everything I'm saying happened in 1996. Discovered Grof's work in 1997, went to my first holotropic breathwork workshop in 1998, you know, so way back.
Wow.
Yeah, and then that started an interest in shamanism as well, and I actually didn't really even go into transpersonal psychology at that point. I got more into the shamanic thing, and then I went to Peru, and I met my wife on a tour with Alberto Vallaldo. Interviewing him, but he's part of Phil's Crazy Wise movie. I'm sure he's in that. Yeah. And I went with Alberto to Peru, and that's where I met my wife, who's Brazilian, and she was a psychologist. And one thing leads to another, and now I live in Brazil. Okay.
Very handy. So lots of synchronistic events leading
a lot. My book is full of it's just awesome.
So you published your book, Sean, in 2013, is that right?
2011.
Oh, 2011, sorry. Okay, so you started
Yeah.
working on your retreats in
In
2013?
2013, yeah.
Okay.
And that really came out of, I don't know, are we jumping ahead too soon to talk about that kind of thing?
We can jump about. It's okay. We go with the flow.
Yeah.
If it fits in now.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that, I went for about 10 years. Like I said, I met my wife. We moved to Brazil. I started teaching English. I got out of the advertising job that I used to be in. And even though it didn't sound like much, and I thought maybe I might do that for a year or two, I really loved teaching English. Didn't have to be in an office, was my own boss, could really connect with people. And it was a lot of fun. And the money was okay too. I could have a good life here in Brazil. So, being able to survive in a very poor country, I was like, whew, things went quite well. And then it was in 2007 that I had two nieces who had their first episode of psychosis 4 months apart.
Oh, wow.
And that's when everything started to be like, what? Huh? Well, what their experience, with my first niece, it was what she went through didn't seem so different from what happened to me, And that's when I really got into it.
How old were they? How old were they at the time, Sean?
The younger niece was 17 when she had her first episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were they saying similar? Were they relating to what you were saying? Were they interpreting their experience in the same sort of way?
The younger niece, it was a little bit complicated for her. She was quite confused. My experience happened when I was 30.
Yeah.
Her experience when she was 17.
Yeah.
She had a lot of fear in her experience, and I didn't. I was going through everything. I was working through my process, even in the hospital, so I had kind of a blessed situation.
Yeah.
But we were able to support her to some extent, and it was through our support, it was the fastest medicated recovery that her psychologist and psychiatrist had ever seen. Because we had her back on her feet in 2 weeks, and they couldn't believe it. But things didn't really break our way. And so I started, they continued to medicate her, and I wanted to find out what's the difference between the spiritual emergency I had and this thing called bipolar disorder that I knew nothing about bipolar disorder. And then I started studying other doctors who had more radical points of view, like R.D. Laing and Lauren Mosher, who followed in R.D. Lang's footsteps, and John Weir Perry, who was a prominent Jungian psychologist. I was reading their books, and I was realizing that you could take people through this process of psychosis pretty much in the same way that I went through. So when my second niece had her episode, we took her back to our apartment, and we didn't even tell her parents. She just said, I'm going through something, and I don't want to go to the psychiatrist. And we took her to our apartment, and she went through a full psychosis right in this room, right here.
Wow. Gosh, that's an initiation with fire.
Yeah, and I was a little bit naive because I was like, she started to try and fly out our windows.
Yeah.
Windows. She's kind of petite, so I could get in the way.
Right.
My wife stuck it out the whole way because she knew what I'd been through. We didn't want to see her hospitalized, and it wasn't until the day 5 that we let her parents know what was going on, and then fortunately, we stuck with it. And to make a long story short, she had 3 episodes that summer, then went back to university, graduated, no meds, nothing. And then the next year she had 2 minor episodes, and then that was it for 8 years, And she was unmedicated for 8 years, no episodes or anything. She's had a few small things recently, that we haven't really even talked about that much, honestly. But it's kind of considered if something really serious happens, Sean and Leisure will step in and we'll work together again.
Oh, it's beautiful. I kind of wanted to ask you about this in relation to what you do now, Sean, because obviously it's very different. If you're working with a family member, you can do much more than if it's something public. And maybe we are jumping ahead too much, but I don't want to forget, because I think this is really important, because you were talking about the age differences as well, and how obviously things manifest very differently for different people. I'm just wondering how you assess where somebody is in their process and whether they're ready to come on one of your healing retreats. What tools would you use to?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have a talk with them in person, of course, and get a feel for where they're at. And then I'll ask them to fill out a questionnaire that's quite detailed. You know, a lot of it is rooted in David Lukoff's work, Dr. David Lukoff, Dr. Stan Grof's work. Mm-hmm. But the bigger picture is I want to see how much really difficult material has come up in the psychosis versus like more of a paranoid orientation versus more spiritual material. I'm looking for how many triggers were involved, for example. There's a lot of triggers or there's no triggers. The age of the first psychosis, how long they've been in their period of bipolar disorder, if they have a genuine interest in my work, and if they're being honest, you know. Because one thing I found with people that have deeper disorders, often those disorders are rooted in really early childhood traumas, maybe even pre that, but often sex abuse involved. Yeah. They've grown up in a world which they believe is dangerous to them, and they've learned not to share themselves with people around them. Yeah. And in my retreat, we sort of need to hit the ground running if we're going to have a good effect. So I'm really looking for people at this point in my development of the retreat that are really ready to get in there and do the job, you know, and get in there. And so I'm hesitant at this point to work with people where I need to take time developing a relationship personally with them to gain their trust. I want the trust to be there from day one. Or else I think that they're wasting their money. Because I'd hate to see them spend a week with me and not trust me and refuse to cooperate and refuse to be honest with me because we haven't been able to develop a relationship yet. You know?
So we kind of jumped ahead, and I wanted to lead into what you're doing now, but I just thought it was important to ask you that while it was in my mind. But one of the things that I really liked about how you said you work was the integrated approach. You know, you have the psychotherapy, you work with the body, that you have the peer support, and you work with the spiritual, the shamanistic kind of element. So I was just wondering if that differs depending on the person, like the percentage of each thing, or do you need somebody to have done some psychotherapy and have some stability before they come to you?
Yeah, I haven't really given it a lot of thought. It's almost as if people are really prepared for the retreat, the work just goes shamanic. Yeah. It just goes, okay, we're working non-dual, everybody's on the same page, let's go. And that involves a lot of breath work, but at the same time, I could see how you would need more of a mix, and some people will need more psychological preparation, for example, more therapy. And the people that I've worked with who have been in therapy have been the ones who have been the best prepared for my retreat, So that's important. Some people need more personal connection that you would get from peer support. And the other part is that we respect the role of psychiatry in this too. And that took me a long time to get to, because I really did start out learning about this alternative world from the work of Robert Whitaker, for example.
Right.
And after I read his work, I was ready to go postal on psychiatry. I mean, I was just, I wasn't happy with how they treated me, but then when I was learning how they're treating other people, it was just very upset. Yeah. But then I came to realize in working with people in psychosis that in the culture we have now, it's just too volatile.
Yeah.
And we needed a more controlled thing. And so at this point, can I just finish it? I insist once people have agreed to work with me, and I've said, yes, I'm working with you. I agree to work with you. You agree to work with me. At that point, I insist that they stay on their medications right through the retreat. And then even afterwards, we have to see how the process in the retreat goes, that the withdrawal should be done very carefully, because often people don't always finish the process in one retreat.
Sure. Yeah. I really appreciate you bringing this up, Sean, because I think, and it's a process we go through, isn't it? I went through a really angry stage at psychiatry and kind of push it away and want to do something completely alternative. But like you said, it has to be an integrated approach. It's too risky to kind of really go just down the spiritual route. We're not in a tribal community where people can be held 24/7, and there are many more risks. So yeah, really appreciate you saying you bringing that up because it's part of personal healing as well, isn't it? I'm just presuming that most people that come to you are kind of, they come to you because you're ready. And it's hard to quantify that, isn't it? It's hard to kind of, assess somebody if they've come to you synchronistically because they're drawn to what you're saying and because they're drawn to the working with breath work and the spiritual way. Then I suppose you can intuitively know that too. So it's
sure. I mean,
there's a framework around it, isn't it?
Yeah, there's, I've got a sociology background, and I did research when I was in advertising. So I've got a lot of experience from my life about taking in data, but then knowing where data has its place and using it to inform you, but not give you the answer. And for example, there's a girl that I've agreed to work with, recently. And on paper, I would not work with this person. I just would not work with this person. But I've talked to her. We've talked about her experiences. She's very courageous. She's a real warrior, and she's willing to try anything, even if it means taking some serious risks. So I'm like, well, if you're ready to take those risks and you got people in place, then I'll take that risk with you. Okay? But I'm not going to work with someone who thinks I'm a guru and that I'm going to solve their problems. Yeah. Because the work can be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love in your videos as well, you always refer to the inner healer, the inner warrior, it has to come from, like Stan Groff says, the inner healer. Yeah.
That's right, from Groff. Yeah. Sometimes I call him Steve. Inner healer seems a little bit, I don't know, too much. So I just call him Steve.
Steve. I kind of
let Steve do what he wants to do.
I like that. I'm going to call on Steve later.
Yeah.
So what techniques do you use, Sean? It's based mainly around breath work, is it, your healing retreats? Describe a week. So when somebody comes to you for a week, what would you tend to do with them?
Yeah. Well, we do, the main techniques are breath work, which is rooted in Stan Groff's holotropic breath work. Originally, I didn't use the name holotropic. I used the term bipolar breath work because I wasn't certified by the Groff people, but also they are very particular about the format you're using when you do holotropic breath work and how that's done and who's involved and this kind of thing. And I needed a little bit more flexibility to experiment. So for example, I'll do a breathwork session with somebody and tell them you breathe as long as you want. And if they stop at 30 minutes, that's okay. For Groff therapists, 30 minutes is not holotropic breath work. It's like you have to do a minimum of an hour and a half, that kind of thing.
Right.
And also sometimes, ironically, even though I still call it bipolar breath work, when people have bipolar disorder, often they're so connected to the other dimension that they don't even need to breathe. I mean, I just lay them down in a protective setting and they just start shaking and twitching and going into non-ordinary states. And I'm just there to protect them and comfort them and make sure they're okay. Now, they're not all like that, but that does happen. Okay. So breathwork is a big part of what I'm doing. And I insist that the person who I'm doing, the client, brings either a supporter or we have some female joint facilitator, like my wife, for example, who's also done a lot of the Groff training. But the supporter doesn't need a lot of training. I can tell them what they need to know when we're there. They just need to be able to bring their own presence, which is important.
So this is a really oversimplified view, I know, but are you creating a safe space to help somebody discharge that energy, the stuck energy, to kind of really get that flowing through the system again? Is that the aim?
Yeah. And, some people have said, there's many ways to heal mental disorders and things like that. My belief is, okay, you can have a lot of different approaches, but unless you're addressing that bioenergetic dimension in some way, unless you're processing that energy, and sometimes it comes with conversation. you can have strong energetic shifts just in a powerful conversation.
Yeah.
Now, that it's that energy that's got to be catalyzed in some capacity, and the breath work's a great way to do it. If people are really active already, if they come to me already activated, we'll just meditate and see what comes up in the meditation. The breathing might not even be necessary. And sometimes it takes more conversation, and people just have to say their thing before you can get moving with them.
So you really adapt it to whatever the person needs, wherever they're at.
To a large extent, yeah, to a large extent. And we've even done things like where we felt that we had one client who really wasn't in touch with his anger, and his anger was there. We put him into a specific exercise where we play angry music and we hold him, and then we ask him to express his anger even before he goes into a holotropic state, and tease him and provoke him, tell him he's going to be living with his mother when he's 40, these kind of things to really get him, that kind of,
So when do you use your own intuition about that? When you say, you could tell, I mean, I know you can, it's difficult to explain, isn't it? Because when you open up to this and you're sensitive and an intuitive, you kind of know when someone's got stuck emotion. But how is that? Do you do that intuitively?
Yeah, I'd say yes, I do. And that's why, to a certain extent, the work is shamanic. Okay, because they're in the other dimension, but I'm in the other dimension too.
Okay.
In a sense,
okay.
But at the same time, especially when people don't have much experience with this kind of work, people need to be very careful about imposing their intuition on other people.
Yeah.
And that's something that you don't want to deny the inner healer of the person.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering, actually. It's like, do people need to kind of come to that realization, I'm holding some anger themselves, or before you start working on that with them?
If I had a very strong feeling that was like, provoke this guy or something like that, I would provoke them. But usually it has to stick there long. Like one of the things they encourage you to do with breath work, like they said, is not really speak to people that much, let them go through their own process. But I've had situations where I wind up talking to the person, talking them through more, because I just feel like they want the conversation, and that's helping facilitate the process, not guiding the process. I never guide the process. But if I do say something, or if I do touch them, it's in a way that would help facilitate where they're already at. And that's a subtlety that I think it takes some training and it takes some experience. I don't think I could do what I'm doing without my education from my trainers at Groff Transpersonal Training, to be quite honest.
Yeah, really important. And also what you said about trusting the process of the person and not guiding the process, is allowing it to unfold on its own. Really important.
And the vast majority, pretty much every other therapy I've ever heard of, especially the breathwork therapies, guide the process in some way. It takes a lot of trust to just say the inner healer is going to do this.
Yeah.
And we're like a doctor delivering a baby. We're not creating the baby. We're not making the baby, inducing the birth. We want it to be as natural as possible. If we can.
That's a really good analogy. I like that. I like that. Yeah. You're birthing Steve. You don't create Steve.
Yeah. And then when you see Steve in action, it's like Steve, or we could even call her Tia. I like Tia too. Maybe I'll use Tia. Tia knows how many people in the room, knows how much time we've got, knows the capabilities of who's in the room, knows who can help out in particular situations. It's like, once you see that intelligence really at work, it even scares me. Yeah. Because it's like, wow, Tia's right here. Tia's right here.
Yeah. Incredible. I was just thinking, Sean, that obviously most people that watch this will, have been through some kind of processing and get this, what we're talking about. But I'm just thinking that this might sound completely alien to some people if they haven't had any experience of their own. And I was just wondering how you manage, obviously you have to cover yourself with insurances, and when you're doing something like this, like how do you manage that kind of shared reality side of things and the risk and things with this when you're doing this. How do you bridge that? Because it's difficult, isn't it, when you're talking about this kind of thing, and really trusting the process and using lots of spiritual techniques which aren't accepted within our mainstream society. Yeah. So how do you? Because you were just, it made me think about it when you were just saying someone's ready to take a risk and you're ready to take that risk with them, and I think that's beautiful, and people are so not used to hearing that when they're in the system, and it's necessary. But how do you balance that? How do you manage it?
Well, first of all, I'm not insured, and when I go do this stuff, I'm just taking a risk. I don't even have health insurance when I travel to Europe and do this.
Wow.
I'm going and I just try and be safe. I live in Brazil. It's different here. People take risks. It's different.
Yeah. Because I was kind of equating you to being in America, and you're not, are you?
No, I'm not. It would be very rare for someone to sue me here. I'm at the end of the day, my big radical technique is breathing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I'm ayahuasca is legal here. If people want to do that, they can.
Yeah.
There's a lot of techniques out there that I think are a lot riskier than what I'm doing. We've done shamanic dances, my wife and I, that are 3 days of no food and no water. I mean, to me, that's much riskier than what I'm doing. So, but there is one thing that, Europe has sort of called me the last 4 years, and I plan on going back. And there is a little bit of a hidden agenda with Europe. There's a few things. First, the support systems for people in Europe seem to be better than in the United States. If you're bipolar in the United States, you're on your way, in a lot of cases, you're on your way to poverty. Because they just don't have the support systems. In Europe, in many European countries, there's a pretty good support network there. And if you get hospitalized, it's going to be free. I know people who've been hospitalized in California, $50,000, $100,000. It can be really a lot. So people do seem to have more of a social structure that they're ready to take a risk with me in Europe. But the other thing is, if I ever did have a problem in one country in Europe, well, I got 26 other countries I can work in, right?
I'm just thinking, I suppose I'm thinking long term, and this Merging Proud campaign it's about changing policy ultimately, human rights, saying these alternatives which are proving really helpful for people should be being commissioned. You're taking people away from, or say in Europe, people are being saved from going into mainstream hospitals. It's reducing the money that's costing. These people should be able to access services for free. So somehow we should be able to legitimize this. So they are. So they're commissioned. It's just how to do that, isn't it? That's what I'm thinking about, bridging that gap, because there's the alternative world, or like you say, if you're in America, you go to hospital and you get thousands and thousands of pounds of bills, and possibly end up worse in the process. So I suppose I'm just really hoping by all of us joining together and our voices speaking out about this, and really raising awareness that somehow the bridge will be forming, and work like you're doing could be commissioned somehow, and other centres, because so many people are desperately needing residential support, and it's not available, without having to go down the hospital route. So
well, my work, it's still in its infancy to a certain extent. Brazil has been a great place to give me the intellectual freedom to do what I've wanted online. It doesn't really have the culture for doing something in a systemic way on a bigger scale. But I think that you've got smaller countries in Europe that things could happen. For the UK, you've got a pretty strong culture of alternative folks in the UK. And the Netherlands, too, is a nice country. We did Crazy Wise. You were at the Crazy Wise conference this year, so I missed it. And Iceland, too. I had a wonderful conversation at a conference in Latvia with a senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Iceland.
Wow.
And he was like, I've read your book.
How
and
amazing.
yeah. Then he invited me to come to Iceland, but then I got bumped for Alan Francis. And I was like, Alan Francis? Yeah.
Oh, well, you know, one of the really exciting development is Guernsey, funnily enough, one of the British Channel Islands. And they've got their own autonomous political system, and they're looking at bringing psychedelic research and into psychedelic psychotherapy research into the mental health system there. They're looking at changing health policy, education policy. So we were over there doing some work with Iceland, and it's the community is really open to this. So things are starting to happen. It's exciting. Yeah.
I do believe that it's going to be small, as we say, postmodern cultures.
Yes.
That understand this, that's going to happen first. So I would expect pockets like San Francisco, Vermont, postmodern culture in Vermont. Iceland is a postmodern culture, as is the Netherlands, you know. And to a certain extent, I think Norway and Sweden as well. Although I've been up in Finland, it's a little weird up there. I've had a couple of clients in Finland, though.
Interesting. Does that, because that's where Open Dialogue originated, isn't it? I think that's become kind of a pocket culture now. So I think it's probably you're talking about the same thing. There's pockets of areas where there's more forward thinking in different countries. I don't know whether maybe it's related to the energetic ley lines. Who knows?
I don't know. But I do know in Finland, for example, there was a lot of talk about open dialogue, but I mean, it never really made it culturally past the Arctic Circle. I mean, where that hospital where Jaakko Seklu works is far north in Finland. And from what I saw from my contacts who were hospitalized, for example, very little of that influence has made it into the South, with the exception of a psychiatric nursing conference I went to with a client of mine from Finland who paid for me to come, and we did our thing. And they had the guy from Iceland who I told you, I can't pronounce his name. I can't remember the guy's name. But he got up in front of this room full of psychiatric nurses and basically told them that psychiatry is fucked. And then at the end of that, they were just all like, and I was like, did anybody hear this conversation? But they were quite nice with me. In the Finnish psychiatric nurses were quite nice, quite open, and they loved our presentation. You know, but you know, nurses see things on the ground level. You know, psychiatric nurses, they see what's going on, and they're looking for innovation. And often the psychiatrists are a little bit removed from that day-to-day interaction.
And it's quite threatening as well, I suppose, isn't it? If you're a doctor and you have to work within this really strict framework, and that's all you've got, and you've got to suddenly let go of all that, it must be really quite frightening.
Yeah. Well, and what I like about what we're doing is we're telling doctors, no, psychiatrists, you do your thing. If you think this person in front of you needs to be medicated, you can medicate them.
Yeah.
Got no problem with that. But if our client comes back to the doctor and says, look, I've been feeling really drowsy since I did this retreat, could we reduce my medication? Because that's what medication would do to you if you really didn't need it to keep you grounded. It will make you drowsy.
Yes.
You know? So I kind of encourage people to work with them like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Would you be able to give us any kind of example, Sean, of a little quick case study of somebody that's been on your retreat? And sorry to put you on the spot, just to think about an outcome from...
Sure. Well, the easiest one, I'll give you two because one's really fast. One is with Monica Kettler. And the great thing about her retreat process was that she was a rapid cycler. So the minute she was off medication, she was going into mania or depression, sometimes in the same day. She could not function without psychiatric medications, but she couldn't tolerate it. She went back to a voluntary clinic in Germany every day for 9 months. She was in a psychiatric hospital every day for 9 months. She went through 27 different medications. And the day her first retreat ended, we took her off the first medication. And she said, but I'm going to get the handshakes now because that's my withdrawal symptom from withdrawal from the medication. I said, I don't think it's the withdrawal from the medication. I think it's the Kundalini. And I don't think you're going to have that problem because we worked all that energy out. Sure enough, steady as a rock. Nothing there, right?
Brilliant.
Yeah, and then she went on to make videos about her experiences. She had subsequent retreats with me, but she posted on Mad in America about her experience, and she's been off meds ever since that first retreat.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
But the big difference is with her, as a rapid cycler, it was obvious that she needed the meds to cope every day. Most people with bipolar disorder, they can go 6 months maybe, or even a year without having anything happen, being off the medication. And so psychiatrists are quite guarded to say if somebody's, quote, healed or not. Right?
Yeah.
And so,
I was just wondering, sorry, I was just wondering actually if whilst we've got people here, if there are any budding researchers that would like to be, I'm just wondering if you have anybody researching and kind of keeping some outcomes for you, Sean, because I think it's so important, isn't it, to prove, that this is this has longevity as well, like people get well and stay well. And I'm just wondering if you have any of that, or if you'd be interested, if anybody's interested in helping out with that, because I know I've had a few researchers contact and say, really interested in helping if there are any opportunities. So now's your chance.
Now's my chance. Well, yeah, I mean, I would like to find a way, watch the airplane there. I'd like to find a way for us to do research that could be done in a great way. I've got a bit of a sociology research background, but getting research done really right is very difficult, and I think needs an experienced hand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to, it's particularly to get it in the medical journals. It's got to be somebody that's in the field.
Right. Yeah. And also sometimes it's been a battle. Like my first client, she had an episode after our first retreat together, which was quite difficult. She had a powerful episode in her first retreat, but she was hospitalized 2 months later. Then a year later, we did a second retreat, and she was off her meds for 3 months, second retreat with me, and she was off her meds for 6 more months. Then she had another episode, okay? But now she's been off meds for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And she can feel energies processing inside of her now, Kundalini energies, that were completely blocked previously. So we're planning on working with her again, but she knows she's improved tremendously. She's lost 46 pounds, about 25 kilos.
Yeah.
So that was my first client. So it's a bit of a bumpy road, and we need people to stick with us, because it for some people it's not going to happen overnight.
No, of course. Yeah, I was just thinking that because, and obviously these processes for most people, if they go the psychiatric route, will last for life. They'll have episodes throughout life. Whereas, you're saying, someone's not going to be normally healed in a week. They're going to have other processes. That's going to be an extended period of recovery. So, but it's hard to prove, isn't it? It's hard to prove whether that would have been worse had they not been on retreat. Would she have got unwell more often? Yeah.
Or we just had one guy who went through a hard time after our retreat because he had a lot of anger come up, and it came up in a mania. And people around him were saying he's worse than ever because he's so angry. And I had to write them and say, look, I was trying to get at his anger for our entire retreat, and we only got to it in the last few days. So I don't see this mania as a sign of failure. I see it as a sign of progress. He's in touch with his emotions. I know it's ugly, but this is part of his process.
Yeah.
And he's the guy that we're going to work with again. And, he's got a pretty serious history of schizoaffective, disorder. And, I've worked with some people that nobody would touch. I mean, my second client had a 25-year history.
Wow.
First hospitalization at 17, and she's 43.
Gosh. Yeah.
And I kept telling her after the first retreat, I said, we got to work together again. I'm coming back to Europe. She said, Sean, I'm not ready. And then this year she was like, okay, Sean, I'm ready. And it took 2 years for her to integrate from her first experience because it was so scary.
Profound. And so would you say it's about kind of helping people to understand their process as well and taking responsibility? Because I think the biomedical model, I was at a conference yesterday talking about this, actually, about the disempowerment of the biomedical model and how you kind of, all of your responsibilities taken away. Whereas if you're helping people to understand what's happening with their process, suddenly they have to take responsibility for that as well. So that's huge, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, and it's been a challenge working with kids where their parents have contacted me, because you know how it is when your parents suggest something. It's like, oh, mom, this kind of thing, and it's like they don't really realize, or some of them, they don't really realize the situation they're in exactly, that this is going to affect their entire life. And even if the parents want to work with me, I need to have that desire from them.
Yeah,
that it's really gotta come. So I want people who are going to tell me, I don't care if I'm hospitalized 10 times. I don't care what we need to do. I want to heal no matter what, and I'm prepared to do anything to do it. If I hear that, I don't need a screener. I mean, I'll work with anybody who's that crazy, because that shows a lot of courage. I mean, if you feel that courage from people, my wife thinks it's a little punchy to say, but at this point, I really believe that the only things required are some time, not a lot of time either, but some time, some money, and courage. That if those three things are in place, and you have to have the support there. People need to be able to, your family needs to be able to understand what you're doing. But if there's time, money, and courage there, then I think we could heal a lot of people.
Yeah. I suppose that's what I mean about services being kind of, we're getting funding for services, because that's the problem, isn't it? When people go through these processes, quite often they can't work and they're in crisis, and money issue is a huge thing. To be able to kind of, that's what we're really trying to do with developing Iceland, is try and make it as charitable as we can.
As possible. Yeah. Because everybody, like you said, you can't afford to be flying all over the place and giving presentations, although you'd love to. I mean, I'd love to do this work for free, but right now, especially this month, my wife's paying my bills this month. I mean, I need to be paying this work if I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we know what it's like. That's what we were saying earlier. It's tough. It's really tough to integrate this and make a living. But that's kind of what I was saying. It's like we need to get it recognised and get it out there so that these things can be paid for by through the systems. Yeah, yeah. Talking about. Sorry, no, go on.
I was going to say, this is the first year where I've got my Groff certification for the first time in September. And we've got our company open as Awakenings Personal Development. It's a registered company here in Brazil. So those things are in place now, whereas they weren't before. And now we're really ready to put up more of a public face for our work and say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do. And we're ready to approach psychiatric hospitals, for example. We may wind up doing, it may happen, we might be doing the Emerging Proud in a psychiatric hospital. It's not my first choice, but we've already been given some leeway there.
Do you know what? I think that's beautiful. And I kind of had that flow feeling when you were just saying this, because I think the only way we can move forward is by working with the system. And this is what I wanted to say, is actually really exciting announcement that we are simultaneously running Emerging Proud events on the 12th of May, and you have very graciously agreed to be one of the countries that join. So I'm so grateful to you and Licia, your wife. Sorry, I've probably pronounced that wrong again.
No, perfect. Perfect.
So I just wanted to let people know what you're planning for that, Sean. So you're having mostly clinicians? Is that right?
Well, first you should know that my wife and I had a lot of arguments when we started this work, because she was all about developing relationships and building bridges and getting recognition among society institutions. And I was all about just going out into the jungle and doing our own thing out there,
She's the grounder.
Yeah, I guess. Because I was like, they're never going to listen. We just got to go and do our thing, And that's pretty much what I've been doing in Europe, is just going off and doing my thing.
Mm.
But we've sort of learned from each other along the way. And now it's a place where, as soon as you mentioned Emerging Proud, the one I immediately took it to was my wife, because she's got the connections.
Mm.
And her closest friends are very connected with the biggest organizations in Sao Paulo, the state of Sao Paulo. So, we're going to be approaching groups from the Regional Council of Sao Paulo that are interested in spirituality, the University of Sao Paulo, which is the biggest university in Latin America, and their
Wow.
departments of psychiatry and psychology, who both have people interested in spirituality, and this group ProSer, which is from the largest psychiatric hospital in South America, in Brazil anyways. And they are interested in the research into mental health, religion, and spirituality. Okay, so we're going to be approaching all of those groups, and that's why it's going to be a pretty high-profile thing that happens. Yeah.
Wonderful. This is so exciting. I'm so over the moon that this is really going international now. I think we have 5 or 6 countries now who are holding an Emerging Proud event on the same day, and we're looking at getting real tangible action points out internationally from those days around the world. So really exciting, lots of bridges forming, and I love the fact that Liz here has grounded you to do this, Sean, because if you were out in the jungle, I wouldn't have been able to contact you and get you involved with this. So she's got a point,
Sure.
Listen to your wife.
In our first year, there was a guy on YouTube who we heard had bipolar disorder, and he was from Brasilia. And he just asked us, he said, "Can I come and stay at your apartment?" And we had this guy that we'd never met before, who had a pretty serious disorder, just come and stay in our apartment for a week. And I took him to a breathwork weekend, and I thought we'd just solve all his problems within a weekend. But we look back now, and I said to Leisha, I said, that Sean back then, I admire him, but he was out there. He was really it was too far, and so it took a 10-year maturing process.
Yeah. So
that now we're in a much better place where we can look at this work realistically, and we don't have any more enemies in this work anymore. I used to hate psychiatry. I understand. They've got a tough job to do, those guys. They really do.
Absolutely. So that's really interesting to hear, Sean, because it's all a journey, isn't it, for all of us? And that integration process is a long one, particularly if you've been really harmed by psychiatry. You said you were pinned down and injected, and that's traumatic. So
it was dramatic.
Yeah, to have got to where you are and want to work with the system, it's incredible. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm ready to work inside the system, because I can't imagine wanting to having a boss. But freelancer, I think I could do the freelance.
Alongside, not inside, alongside maybe.
Yeah. And those psychiatrists, they're pretty tough on each other. They're very hierarchical. The head psychiatrists are really rude. Oh, internet connection unstable. Are we okay?
Oh. We're still here at the moment. Let's fingers crossed that we're gonna.
Okay. Yeah, it's a tough culture in there, but I'm a little bit optimistic. You don't need to convince psychiatry. You just need to convince a couple of guys with some power at one hospital. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
What are my potential? Oh, go ahead.
No. I was just saying it feels like a real grassroots movement. It's like the peers are leading the way. The peers are shouting the loudest and really kind of bringing this to the fore now. And it feels like I started this with the intention of, the strength of the Black rights movement, the gay rights movement. It's like, right now we need a spiritual rights movement. And that's how those movements started from the ground up. So who knows what we can achieve?
Yeah, and I think the time is right. It's the director of Groff Transpersonal Training, Tav Sparks. He's like, when the archetype drops, it drops. He opened a clinic a few years ago, and it quickly closed its doors because they went bankrupt within 6 months. Because it was like, no matter what you do, if it's not the time, it's not the time.
Yeah.
I have even after everything I've been through, because it's been a grind, I'm very optimistic about this year. I don't know. I have a feeling for 2017. I'm hoping 2017 is the 2012 that never showed up. Someone's like, where were you? You're late.
Yeah. I completely agree. There's something about this year that feels really special. Yes. And it's amazing to be sharing it with all of you guys. And I'm so grateful, Sean, that you've agreed to be part of this and, really join and move forwards with organising such a brilliant event as well. So this is the first time people will be hearing about this. So really excited about announcing that we're going international. So thank you so much. And what a note to end on, I think. 2017 is our year to emerge proud.
I'm not going to say it's our year just yet, knock on wood. I've been through too many of those our years, but it does feel much better. It does feel better.
Yeah. You're saying it from a more grounded place, I suppose, and not from the alternate parallel universe. Yeah.
I was actually in a rush to get my videos made so that they would be ready for 2012. And then when that happened, and then I was like, this is 2012? Seriously? It was quite a disappointing year for me.
Oh. Steve's been crying for 5 years.
Yeah, it's just like, you guys aren't ready yet. You gotta wait. You gotta wait. Leisha said, it just feels like everything is like this big lock is just being like chunk 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 chunk. Big tectonic plates are being put into place. And then once that all comes together, the revolution could be quite quick.
It feels like that. It feels like the snowball effect, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well, a quick analogy before we go. We've all got these smartphones. We all take them for granted now. I mean, we were talking about this convergence of technology and everything turning into bits and bytes and digital data and video and photos all being able to transmit everywhere. We were talking about that stuff in 1994, 1995.
Yeah.
And that was in, the magazines were talking about that then. And then it never really came to fruition until 2007. And then even that, until you get 4G, it's pretty slow, So, yeah, I mean, you can have the vision, but sometimes things take time.
Yeah, and I suppose, it takes time to manifest things. We put the energy out there and it just takes a while to actually show up in reality, this reality.
And this reality is way bigger than I ever imagined. I mean, what's going on and my role in this and your role in this is bigger than I imagined. I didn't think it was going to be this big.
Yeah, my inner Steve is quivering right now. Like, what have I done? So how do people get hold of you, Sean? Could you just let people know your websites and your...
Okay, yeah. Well, I changed my name because I was Am I Bipolar Waking Up? My YouTube channel, my website was Bipolar Waking Up, but it's not a question anymore. I felt like I needed a more assertive stance and a more assertive website. So I'm at bipolarawakenings.com. And that's where you can find me.
Wonderful.
You can book a consultation or you can just write me in the contact page. And that's where the things get started. And I wasn't expecting to spend so much time talking about the retreat aspect, but maybe it was a good thing because you're having a lot of people talking about their stories, and I've talked about my story. It's online already. So
I kind of figure people know your story, Sean. Maybe, and if they don't, there's so many videos they can find out. But please, if there's anything that you kind of want to add that you think we haven't covered, then I never know where these things are going. We kind of go with the flow, and I just follow intuition about what people need to hear or, what comes up. So, but if there's anything...
If I've forgotten anything, I'm sure it's in one of my 50 videos. So you can find it. Okay.
Or if there's anything people specifically want to know, are you happy for people to contact you?
Sure. They can contact me, especially people who are involved in Emerging Proud.
Yeah,
I mean,
wonderful.
These are people who are really close to this thing. And if I could say one thing to people is make no bones about it. I mean, this is the leading edge, and I'm quite shocked to find myself on it. I always wanted to be here my whole life. There's no paradigm more advanced in the world than what we're talking about here right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's an exciting place to be.
Yeah. Beautiful Beautiful. Come join.
Come join.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Sean, and everything you're doing. And I shall look forward to getting the information out about Emerging Proud Day and finding out more about what you're doing in Brazil.
Okay, great.
Okay. Speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.